A quiet night turns into an emergency call that would change everything. Two paramedics respond to what seems like a routine distress call, but on the way, something unexpected happens. A wolf appears in the middle of the road, staring at them intently. Instead of running away, it behaves strangely, as if trying to communicate. But why? What does this animal want? Without realizing it, the paramedics were about to break every rule and witness something no one would ever believe. The winding road cut through the dense forest like a forgotten scar of civilization. The early morning fog clung to the ground like a ghostly veil, distorting the shadows of the towering ancient trees. The scent of damp earth and fresh pine lingered in the air, blending with the muffled hum of the ambulance engine as it moved cautiously through the natural corridor. Emily stared out the window, her eyes following the eerie dance of the mist. Something about that morning felt different, unsettling, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Jake kept both hands steady on the wheel, guiding the ambulance with the patience that came from years of experience. The radio crackled with details of their emergency call, just an elderly woman who needed help getting up after a fall. Routine. But then, a shadow crossed the headlights. Too fast to be a deer. Too heavy to be a coyote. Jake instinctively slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the damp asphalt. The impact almost happened, but the ambulance stopped just inches away from whatever was in the road. A dark figure emerged from the mist. A wolf. And not just any wolf. It was massive, with thick gray fur and golden eyes that shimmered with an almost human intelligence. It stood still, staring at them, as if waiting for something. Emily's heart pounded. She had grown up near the forest and knew that wolves usually avoided humans, especially in the middle of the road, in front of a moving vehicle. But this one didn't run. It was waiting for them. Jake gripped the wheel tightly, his eyes flickering between the headlights and the wolf standing in their path. "What the hell is it doing?" he muttered, his voice lower than he intended. Emily swallowed hard. The thick fog seemed to close in around the ambulance, making the moment feel even more surreal. The wolf took a step forward. Slowly, it lifted its front paw and placed it against the ambulance's windshield. The muffled sound of the large paw against the glass made time stand still. Emily held her breath. In all her years on the job, she had never seen anything like this. The wolf showed no aggression, no growling, no bared teeth. Instead, it stepped back slightly, then returned, repeating the gesture, as if trying to communicate. Jake exchanged a quick glance with Emily. His instincts told him to call wildlife control, request backup, report the strange behavior of a predator on the road. But Emily felt something else. There was desperation in those golden eyes. The wolf wasn't challenging them. It was asking for help. She hesitated for a second, then, without realizing it, her hand reached out, stopping Jake from grabbing the radio. The wolf turned and started walking away slowly, stopping a few meters ahead as if waiting. Then, it looked back. It was calling them. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Jake pressed his lips together, still trying to process what was happening. "This is crazy," he muttered. Emily agreed. It was crazy. But at the same time, she knew they couldn't ignore this. The wolf took a few more steps down the road and stopped again, glancing back once more. This time, there was something different in its gaze. A silent plea for help. And then Emily understood. They had a choice to make. Follow that wolf into the forest, or ignore the call that could change everything. The silence inside the ambulance was almost as thick as the fog wrapping around the road. The wolf stood ahead, its golden eyes locked onto the two paramedics, its breath forming soft clouds in the crisp morning air. Jake still gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if expecting the animal to suddenly give up and disappear into the trees. But the wolf didn't give up. On the contrary, it insisted. This time, instead of just staring, the animal stepped forward and let out a low, mournful howl, a sound heavy with anguish and urgency. The sound sent a chill down Emily's spine. She had heard wolves howl before, but never like this. It wasn't a territorial call. It wasn't a warning of danger. It was a plea for help. Jake let out a heavy sigh, his hand hovering over the radio. "We should call for backup. This isn't normal." Emily, however, kept her eyes fixed on the wolf. She felt something beyond logic, beyond the training she had received to handle emergencies. This animal needed them. The wolf slowly turned and took a few steps toward the forest, momentarily vanishing into the mist. But before it disappeared completely, it stopped and looked back one more time. Waiting. Emily had already made up her mind. She grabbed her medical bag from the back seat and opened the ambulance door, feeling the cold morning air wrap around her. Jake's eyes widened. "Are you insane? You have no idea what's in there." Emily hesitated for a second, then, with one last look at Jake, she answered firmly. "I know someone needs our help." Jake glanced at the empty road, then at the dark forest, muttering a low curse. He knew there was no point in arguing with Emily once she had made a decision. Grumbling, he shut off the ambulance's engine and grabbed a portable emergency kit. "If I get eaten by a wolf, I swear I'm coming back to haunt you." Emily gave a nervous smile. "Promise?" Jake scoffed but followed her anyway. The two walked toward the dark tree line, where the wolf patiently waited for them. The moment it saw them moving, it bolted into the forest, vanishing into the shadows. Emily and Jake exchanged a glance before finally crossing the road's edge and stepping into the darkness between the trees. And that's when they realized, they were walking into something far bigger than they had ever imagined. The moment they stepped into the forest, the morning light dissolved into a shroud of shadows. The mist slithered along the ground, weaving between the tree roots like a living curtain. The air was thick and damp, carrying the earthy scent of the woods, blended with something different. A faint metallic smell lingered in the air, triggering Emily and Jake's senses. The wolf led the way, moving with instinctive precision. Its agile, muscular body glided over the uneven terrain, effortlessly dodging twisted branches. But it wasn't just the path that demanded attention. Every few steps, the wolf would stop, look back and wait, as if afraid its new allies might fall behind. Emily tightened her grip on her medical bag. A growing unease crept into her chest, but something deep inside urged her forward. There was something about this wolf, something in the urgency of its gaze, that told her moving ahead was the only option. Jake, on the other hand, walked in silence, his sharp eyes scanning everything around them. He knew forests like this. And he knew that when an animal's instincts overruled its natural fear of humans, something truly unusual was happening. The trail was narrow and full of tracks. The wolf's paw prints mingled with irregular marks on the ground, as if something larger had passed through in a hurry. Some branches were broken, as though someone, or something, had rushed through the trees. Emily paused for a moment, running her fingers over a trunk where deep scratches had been left behind. "This happened recently," she murmured. Jake stepped closer, observing the details. "And it wasn't just an animal," he added, his tone more serious now. The wolf grew restless, moving ahead before doubling back, urging them to pick up the pace. Its ears twitched in every direction, attuned to sounds only it could hear. Then, they saw the first real sign of what lay ahead. On the ground, an alarming clue was scattered among the dry leaves. Jake crouched down, touching the damp soil around it. "This isn't a good sign." Emily scanned the area and noticed something caught in the low branches. Carefully, she pulled out a small scrap of fabric. A dirty tarp soaked in an odd chemical scent. "This doesn't belong in this forest," she said, exchanging a look with Jake, one filled with both apprehension and curiosity. The wolf lifted its head, sniffed the air, and let out a low, trembling howl. The sound echoed between the trees, thick with urgency and despair. Emily's pulse quickened. Then, she saw it. There, among the dense shadows of the trees, something lay on the ground. Small. Fragile. Something that was still breathing. The wolf bolted forward, its wild eyes filled with concern. Emily and Jake sprinted after it. And what they found would change everything forever. As they pushed past the last row of trees, the clearing unfolded before them. The sight was heartbreaking. Beneath a massive fallen tree lay 3 wolf pups. 2 of them were still, their tiny bodies curled up against each other, seeking comfort in their shared warmth. But the third, weak, struggling, moved in shallow, uneven breaths, its tiny chest rising and falling irregularly. A tight knot formed in Emily's throat. What had happened here? Jake moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the surroundings. His experience allowed him to notice details others might have missed. Torn food wrappers littered the ground, some crumpled, others bearing bite marks. The tarp they had found earlier now seemed to be part of whatever had transpired here. The adult wolf, the one who had led them, approached the pups with remarkable gentleness. Lowering its head, it nudged the struggling pup with its nose, letting out a soft, mournful whimper. Emily knelt beside the tiny wolf, her instincts kicking in immediately. The signs were alarming. The pup trembled, too weak to react. Its gums were pale, and its breathing was unsteady. Its eyes flickered, struggling to stay open. The mother wolf watched Emily and Jake closely, her golden eyes reflecting a mix of fear and hope. She had brought them here for a reason, and now, she was trusting them. Jake grabbed his radio, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "We need immediate backup. We've got a critically weak pup." As he spoke, Emily was already in motion. Every second counted. She pulled out her emergency kit and began treating the most obvious injuries. Small cuts lined the pup's tiny muzzle and paws, but the real danger was internal. It was likely that it had ingested something toxic. Emily looked up at Jake. "We need to stabilize it. Now." The adult wolf remained beside them, eyes locked on every move they made. There was something undeniable in that gaze, an understanding that went beyond instinct. Somehow, it knew they were its only chance. As Emily prepared a solution to help the pup, a tense silence settled over the clearing. Only the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and the pup's labored breathing could be heard. Then, something unexpected happened. The wolf stepped closer, slowly, carefully, and with delicate precision, pressed its nose against Emily's hand. It was brief, but it meant everything. Emily knew, in that moment, that she would do whatever it took to save this fragile life. And so, against all odds, the fight for survival had begun. Are you enjoying the story so far? Before finding out what's coming, like the video and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like this. Time seemed to slow as Emily and Jake moved in perfect sync, each playing a crucial role in the desperate attempt to save the tiny wolf. The air in the clearing was thick with tension and hope. Emily opened her first aid kit, her skilled hands moving swiftly. She had treated countless patients in extreme conditions before, but never anything like this. The pup was weak. Its tiny chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, its half-closed eyes drifting further away. Jake activated the radio again. "We need a vet here ASAP. The pup is showing signs of poisoning and severe dehydration. We'll try to stabilize it until you arrive." The response came quickly, but it wasn't what they were hoping for. The estimated arrival time was at least 40 minutes. "He doesn't have 40 minutes, Emily whispered, more to herself than to Jake. The mother wolf remained still a few feet away, watching their every move with unwavering intensity. It was as if she understood each action, each choice, each desperate attempt to save her pup. Then, the tiny body twitched slightly. "No. Stay with me," Emily murmured, her voice laced with emotion. She grabbed a syringe and prepared a subcutaneous hydration injection. It was a delicate procedure, especially for such a fragile and weakened animal. Jake gently held the pup, his expression full of worry. The little wolf barely reacted, making them hold their breath in agonizing suspense. Emily carefully inserted the needle. The fluid began to flow slowly. Every drop was another chance. The mother wolf took a step forward. Emily froze, her breath catching. Was this the moment instinct would take over? But instead of lunging, the wolf lowered her head and let out a low, mournful whimper. Jake swallowed hard. It wasn't just instinct. It was love. It was desperation. Emily pressed her lips together and kept going. Minute by minute, every detail mattered. She cleaned the pup's tiny wounds, applied an antiseptic ointment to prevent infection, and finally, gently massaged the area around its belly, trying to stimulate its internal organs. The pup shivered slightly. "That's it. Come on, little one," Emily murmured, her eyes shining with hope. But then, the pup's breathing faltered again. Emily and Jake exchanged a desperate glance. The fight for survival was far from over. Time seemed to be working against them. Every second was precious, every beat of the tiny pup's heart was both a victory and a risk. Emily kept her hands steady, even as the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. Jake constantly checked the pup's pulse, his tense expression revealing the urgency of the moment. The mother wolf remained still, her eyes locked onto her pup, filled with both fear and expectation. Then, Jake's radio crackled with an update. "Rescue team en route. ETA 10 minutes. Emily let out a relieved breath, but the pup was still struggling to breathe. They needed to do more. She quickly reassessed the situation. The signs of poisoning were still evident, and the little wolf's body was fighting at its limit. "We need to stimulate his metabolism to flush out the toxin faster," Emily said. Jake nodded. They had no room for hesitation. Emily grabbed a small bottle of activated charcoal liquid, the only thing that could help absorb the remaining toxins. With extreme care, she dripped the liquid into the side of the pup's mouth, silently pleading for his body to have enough strength to respond. The silence was deafening. The mother wolf remained motionless, her breathing unsteady, betraying her anguish. Her eyes reflected a fragile balance of fear and hope. Then, a sound, so faint it almost went unnoticed, broke through the heavy stillness. The pup let out a tiny breath and moved one of his paws. "He's responding," Jake exclaimed, his eyes shining with hope. Emily barely contained her emotions. She could feel the pup's heartbeat getting stronger. At that moment, the distant sound of engines shattered the quiet of the forest. The rescue team had arrived. The mother wolf lifted her head, as if understanding that help had finally come. Veterinarians quickly jumped out of their vehicles, carrying specialized equipment. "What do we have?" one of them asked, kneeling beside Emily and Jake. "Severe poisoning, deep cuts on his paws and mouth. We administered subcutaneous hydration, cleaned the wounds, and gave him activated charcoal to neutralize the toxins," Emily replied. The vet nodded, quickly assessing the pup. "He's got a chance. But we need to move now." They carefully prepared the tiny wolf, placing him in a thermal stretcher to maintain his body temperature. The mother wolf let out a low, mournful sound and slowly stepped closer. The moment was thick with tension. Everyone held their breath. The vet remained still, respecting her space. Then, something unexpected happened. The mother wolf didn't growl. She didn't lunge. Instead, she gently pressed her nose against her pups. As if to say, "Fight, my little one. Come back to me." The look she gave Emily and Jake was something they would never forget. There was no anger. No fear. Only gratitude. With great care, the team placed the pup in the vehicle and started the drive to the rehabilitation center. Emily and Jake stood in the clearing, watching as the mother wolf gazed at the departing vehicle. Then, without a sound, she disappeared into the forest. They didn't know if they would ever see her again. But one thing was certain, she had trusted them when it mattered most. And now, all that was left was to wait for the final miracle. The little wolf fought for his life for days. At the rehabilitation center, veterinarians and biologists took turns ensuring he received the best care. The severe poisoning had weakened him, but thanks to the quick intervention, his body slowly began to recover. Emily and Jake visited the pup whenever they could. Every small milestone was celebrated: the first time he drank water on his own, his hesitant first attempt to stand, the moment he let out a soft, fragile howl. But not everything was a victory. The other two pups didn't survive. A quiet sorrow hung over the team, a reminder that, despite all their efforts, nature had already decided their fate before help could arrive. Emily tried not to blame herself, but it was hard. The mother wolf's eyes were always in the back of her mind. "She trusted us," Jake murmured one evening as they watched the pup sleep. "And we did everything we could," Emily replied, gently running her fingers through the pup's soft fur. Days passed, and the pup finally regained his strength. Now, he ran around the rehabilitation enclosure, playfully pouncing on a piece of wood, testing his agility. He was no longer a fragile creature on the brink of death. He was a survivor. But something was still missing. The pup often gazed beyond the enclosure, staring at the forest. His instincts were calling him home. And Emily knew exactly what had to be done. The morning sun filtered through the treetops, casting golden light and shifting shadows across the forest floor. The air carried the crisp scent of damp earth mixed with fallen leaves. Emily and Jake stood still, watching as the young wolf took his first hesitant steps outside the transport crate. It was a defining moment. For weeks, they had cared for him. And now, they had to let him go. The pup took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air again. He stepped forward, his paws sinking slightly into the soft ground. For a moment, he looked back at Emily and Jake, his rescuers. Then, he ran. Emily crossed her arms tightly over her chest, feeling a lump form in her throat. It was like watching a child grow up and leave home. Then, the first howl rang out. Soft. Distant. But unmistakable. Jake and Emily froze. The forest fell into a brief silence as if it, too, was waiting for an answer. And then, it came. A second howl, closer now, filled with urgency and emotion. A shiver ran down Emily's spine. The mother wolf was there. A subtle movement stirred in the shadows of the trees. Something was approaching, slow and deliberate. And then, she emerged. Majestic. Fierce. Her golden eyes gleamed in the morning light, locking onto the pup who was now racing toward her. The moment was pure electricity. The young wolf stumbled slightly in his excitement before reaching his mother. The impact of their reunion was silent, yet deeply powerful. The mother lowered her head, touching her nose to the pup's, sniffing him, examining every inch. She needed to be sure. Her entire body trembled, not with fear, but with something deeper. Emotion. Jake held his breath. Emily raised her hands to her face, her eyes misty. Then, the mother did something that left them speechless. With infinite gentleness, she licked the pup's forehead. A pure gesture, a mix of love and relief. He was alive. He had come back. For a long moment, the mother wolf pressed her nose against her pup's head, as if trying to memorize his scent, to never lose him again. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze toward the two humans. Emily and Jake felt small in her presence. It wasn't fear. It was respect. In that wild, piercing gaze, there was more than just instinct. There was recognition. There was gratitude. The silence of the forest was broken by one final howl from the mother wolf, a call that echoed through the trees, a farewell, a thank you. The pup, now strong enough to follow her, turned for a brief second. His eyes met Emily's and Jake's. Just a second. But in that moment, everything was said. Then, he turned and disappeared into the forest, following his mother. Emily felt her chest tighten. He was going home. Jake let out a deep breath and looked up at the sky, where the last wisps of clouds dissolved under the warmth of the sun. The cycle had come full circle. Emily wiped away a single tear as it rolled down her cheek. She would never forget this moment. Neither would Jake. Neither would the mother wolf. Neither would the pup who, one day, returned to where he truly belonged. That day, we realized that nature is so much more than just survival. It is love. It is sacrifice. It is trust. That mother wolf shattered every barrier between humans and animals because she knew that, to save her pup, she had to trust those who once brought her species pain. She gave us something precious that day. A lesson in courage. In hope. In the unbreakable power of a mother's love. And in how, sometimes, all it takes is a single outstretched hand, for a true miracle to happen. If you've followed the story this far, give it a like, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this.